The tide pulled them away from the white shores, toward an uncertain horizon. The sea was restless beneath the hull, dark waters churning as if they, too, whispered warnings of what lay ahead. The sea swelled and dipped beneath the hull, restless beneath the weight of what was to come. At the prow, the salt-thick wind pulled at the tattered remains of his cloak, his gaze fixed on the waters ahead. It smelled of storms, not the kind that break upon the land in a fury of rain and thunder, but the kind that reshapes the world in its wake. His hands, calloused and blood-stained, gripped the rail as he watched the fading silhouette of the white shores, where his men, what was left of them, found their respite. They had earned it, if such a thing could still be said of men who had endured the treachery at Paith. What rest could be found among ghosts and memories, he could not say. He did not turn back. He could not. To do so would be to see what remained of his men who had followed him through this war, through treachery and ruin, only to be left here, on a shore that was neither home nor victory. He did not know if they would wake with the strength to fight again, or if this war had already hollowed them beyond repair. They deserved more than this half-life of waiting, of licking wounds that might never heal. They had fought, they had bled, and now they were given the mercy of rest. But for him there was no rest. His path now led him elsewhere, across the churning waters, to the island where the Sewi waited, to their hidden halls where the sea-worn stones whispered in the voices of ancients, the last voice of the old ways. Aios had met him only once before, in the twilight halls of a forgotten sanctuary, where the air smelled of damp stone and the embers of sacred fires long since extinguished. A keeper of old wisdom, his tongue speaking truths older than kings and wars, truths carved into tide-washed cliffs and sung in the voices of the land. It was he who had warned of this storm before it gathered, who had read the omens in the heavens. The last time he had met the high priest, the man had sat chained to his altar of stone, fingers tracing the worn carvings of gods long since abandoned. The air in that place had been thick with the stale scent of damp stone and old embers, of time forgotten. "You have come looking for strength," the Sewi had murmured without looking up. "But what you need is something far more costly. The isle has forgotten itself, and so it has forgotten what it must become," the priest had told him, voice low and knowing, as if speaking with the wind itself. "It has left itself vulnerable. You wish for swords, but swords alone will not save Askria. This is not only a war of men, it is a reckoning. The isle is not yet lost, but the land must decide if it will endure or be remade. It will not be your blade that shapes the next age, but it may be your hand that holds the door open long enough for it to be chosen." Cryptic as ever, but that had been months ago, before the omens grew darker, the tides more restless. Before Askria stood on the precipice of war, not a war of men alone, but something greater. A reckoning. Wisdom alone would not stop the enemy that was coming. Now he was not coming for riddles, for half-spoken truths wrapped in the weight of centuries. He was coming for an answer. How does Askria survive this war? But who remained to rally beneath their banner, to lend strength to a cause that had already bled itself dry? Those left standing were weary, their spirits frayed, their swords dulled by too many battles, fought for too little gain. And if they marched forward as they always had, what awaited them but the same ruin, the same bitter end written in ash and bone? No, something had to change. But what? And at what cost? The Druids' people, those who had once walked in step with the land, who had spoken with trees and rivers, were but a shadow of what they had been. Once the green-touched warriors of the wilds had been called to arms, standing as the first and last line against the darkness. but time had thinned them, their wisdom now spoken in hushed tones, their strength a flickering ember. Those warriors were gone, their bodies long since mingled with the roots of the earth they had sworn to protect. The druids who remained were not warriors. They were healers, sages, singers of laments for battles already lost. What warriors still followed the Awen were few, brave, devoted, but too few. They had no swords to offer him, only warnings, only sorrow for the path he now tread. And he was beginning to understand why. They could not turn the tides of war, could not hold back the coming dark. The sea folk had long been bound to Askria, though their allegiance was fickle, their laws winding as the currents that carried them. Their strength would help to hold the tide of the storm that was coming, but they will not come to the southern shores. Their histories are still honor-bound to the north. And then there was the other summons, a shadow upon the horizon, older than the stone of the isle. His thoughts to the one who returned from the long-forgotten mounts, a voice that did not come from the living. No one knew what he was, not truly. He was a name spoken in caution. There were stories, terrible, blood-soaked stories of the warlord, the sorcerer, the king who had shattered the isle beneath his heel, who had carved his legend into the bones of the fallen. And when death came for him, he had walked so deep into its embrace that it had never quite let him go. Not dead, not living, something else entirely. And now, after an age of silence, he had returned. Not to rule, not to conquer, but to offer his hand to beg. Beg for an alliance to save Askria, or so he claimed. He spoke of salvation, of Askria's survival. But Aios had learned long ago that salvation did not come without cost. What, he wondered, had he brought back with him? The Lord of Mounds. Even the name sent unease curling in his gut. The druids had warned him of such figures, those who strayed too far into the old powers, who sought dominion over what should not be bound. And yet, Askria stood at the edge of oblivion once more. The enemy came. The walls would not hold. Aios exhaled sharply, his breath stolen by the cold wind. He had seen the signs, the omens twisting in the smoke and the bloodied waters. There would be no time to rebuild, no time to mend his forces before the next war began. The Lord of Mounds may be the only one who understood that, and that was what frightened him most.